The 8 divines aren't just statues you walk past to grab a buff. They're the gods who literally killed themselves to build the world you're standing in, and each one of them has a story weirder, darker, and more complicated than the game ever bothers to tell you. So today, I'm breaking down every single divine in Skyrim and everything we know about them, starting with the one who invented time itself, Akatosh. Akatosh is the dragon god of time, not a dragon who happens to be associated with time. He is time. Before Akatosh emerged after the creation of Mundus, time literally did not exist. No before, no after, no sequence of events, just an infinite, static nothing. His very crystallization into being is what kicked the clock on and started reality moving forward. Every single moment you've ever experienced in the Elder Scrolls universe exists because this one entity decided to show up. That alone would make him the most important divine in the Pantheon. But here's where it gets complicated. The Empire worships Akatosh as their chief deity. His sphere encompasses endurance, invincibility, and everlasting legitimacy. That last one is the important bit. The entire political authority of the Empire rests on the idea that Akatosh personally endorses their right to rule. Every emperor, every legion, every territorial claim traces its divine mandate back to the dragon god of time. He's not just a religious figure. He's the theological foundation of imperial power across all of Tamriel. But ask a traditional Nord about Akatosh, and you'll get a very different answer. To the old Nordic religion, the dragon god isn't some benevolent protector of civilization. He's Alduin, the World Eater, a cyclical force of apocalyptic destruction whose entire purpose is to devour the world at the end of every era so it can be reborn. The same deity the Empire parades around as their cosmic stamp of approval. The Nords, historically viewed as the literal end of everything, which is, not ideal for Imperial PR. And it gets weirder. The Aldmir call him Auriel, the Khajiit call him Alkosh. Every culture across Tamriel has a different name, and none of them fully agree on what he actually is. Some scholars propose that the original dragon god, known simply as Akka, was shattered into multiple aspects through dragon breaks, particularly the Middle Dawn. Under this theory, Akatosh, Alduin, and every dragon you fight in Skyrim are all fragments of one incomprehensibly powerful entity that got broken apart when time itself fractured. The dragon cult of ancient Skyrim understood this. They recognized that dragons carried a piece of Akatosh's sovereignty, which is exactly why they elevated dragons to divine rulers. But then the Dragon War happened. The dragons were eradicated, and post-war Nords increasingly adopted the imperial view that Akatosh and Alduin are completely separate beings, a convenient theological pivot that just so happened to align with imperial political interests. So, is Akatosh the benevolent father of time who legitimizes empires? Or is he a fractured piece of a shattered god whose other half wants to eat the universe? Nobody knows for certain, and that ambiguity is exactly what makes him the most fascinating divine in the entire Pantheon. But if a god with an identity crisis sounds unsettling, wait until you hear about the divine, who might not have been a god at all, Arkay. Arkay is the god of the cycle of birth and death. And I want to stress the word cycle here, because most people hear god of death and immediately picture some grim reaper figure lurking in a crypt somewhere. That's not what Arkay is. His domain covers the entire loop: birth, life, death, rebirth, the changing of the seasons. He's less angel of death and more cosmic quality control for the entire circle of existence. But here's where Arkay gets genuinely interesting, and it starts with his origin story, because nobody can agree on where he actually came from. The first version says Arkay was a mortal shopkeeper, just some guy running a store. One day he stumbles across an ancient, untranslated manuscript and becomes completely consumed by it. He stops eating, stops sleeping, stops doing basically anything a functioning human being should do. He dedicates every waking moment to deciphering this text, which apparently contained the fundamental secrets of life and death. And the cruel irony is that he only understood what it was telling him after he'd already contracted plague from neglecting his own body. He was literally dying because he spent too long reading about dying. So there he is, on his deathbed, finally grasping the deepest truths of existence. And he prays to Mara for more time. Mara shows up and gives him the most insane binary choice in Elder Scrolls history: die right now, or become a god for eternity. Hey, quick question before you go. Do you want to be immortal? No pressure. He picked the god option, obviously. But then there's the second origin story from the monomyth, which says Arkay was never mortal at all. According to this version, he was among the very first spirits to crystallize after time began, making him one of the most primordial Aedric entities in existence. Not a shopkeeper who got lucky. A fundamental force of the universe from day one. Nobody knows which version is true. His own priesthood can't agree. Now, the practical side. His priests are the most aggressively anti-necromancy faction you'll find outside of the vigilance of Stendarr. Raising the dead isn't just frowned upon. It's the single worst thing you can do, a direct violation of the natural order that Arkay exists to protect. And his divine law backs this up with something tangible. Bodies that receive proper burial rites are said to be protected from necromantic animation. Skip the funeral, and that corpse is fair game for any necromancer who wanders by. His primary center of worship in Skyrim sits in Falkreath Hold, which makes perfect sense. Falkreath is basically defined by its massive graveyard. The whole town revolves around death and remembrance. If RK was going to set up shop anywhere, it was always going to be there. And here's one last thing that keeps the community arguing. Some fan theorists believe RK might actually be more powerful than Akatosh. The logic goes like this. Akatosh controls time, sure, but even time has to end eventually. Everything terminates in death, and death is RK's domain. If the god of time is ultimately subject to the god of death's jurisdiction, then who's really running the show? It's a bold claim, but nobody's been able to fully shut it down either. But if you think a god with two contradictory origin stories and a claim to supreme cosmic power is complicated, wait until you meet the divine whose entire theology revolves around beauty, love, and having zero restrictions on your romantic life. Dibella. Dibella has a reputation. And look, it's not entirely undeserved. Her commandment literally states that there should be no limit on the number of lovers a person might take. That's an actual divine teaching, written down, officially endorsed by a god, carved into the theological bedrock of Tamriel. So yeah, she gets a certain kind of attention from the community. But here's the thing. Dibella is actually one of the most genuinely wholesome deities in the entire Elder Scrolls universe, and it's not even close. Her core teachings emphasize friendship, harmony, and kindness above everything else. She's described as one of the truly pure gods, whose intentions remain wholly benevolent. Zero ulterior motives, zero moral gray areas, zero, well, technically she did flood a city that one time footnotes. She just wants people to appreciate beauty, create art, love each other, and stop being miserable about it. The unlimited lovers thing is really just one bullet point on a much longer list of celebrating life without restriction. But naturally, that's the one everyone remembers. Her origin story is as noble as it gets. Dibella emerged from the primordial merging of Anu and Padme alongside the other Idra, and then sacrificed herself to help create the mortal realm. That's the same creation myth as Akatosh and Arkay. She gave up her divine immortality so that mortals could exist and experience the beauty she embodies. And unlike some of the other divines who have complicated histories or the occasional apocalyptic alter ego, Dibella's track record is completely spotless. She is the goddess equivalent of that friend who brings homemade cookies to every gathering, and genuinely means it every single time. Now, her role as patroness of artistic creation is where things get genuinely wild. There's an artifact called the Brush of True Paint that was allegedly woven from Dibella's own hair. And this isn't just some enchanted paintbrush that makes your landscapes look a bit nicer. It literally opens a portal into the canvas itself, allowing the artist to physically step inside and paint at life size. You're not painting a world on a flat surface. You're building one from the inside. That's the kind of power Dibella represents, and honestly, it might be one of the most absurd artifact concepts in the entire franchise. Most divine artifacts give you a cool sword. Dibella's gives you a pocket dimension made of paint. Her worship in Skyrim centers around the Temple of Dibella in Markarth, where her priestesses maintain something called the Exalted Protocol. It's a mysterious ceremony through which Dibella transmits her divine will through a designated messenger known as a Sibyl. The specifics are kept deliberately vague, which only makes the whole thing more fascinating. Most divines just sit on their cosmic thrones and let mortals sort things out. Dibella is actively sending messages through a chosen vessel. She's engaged, she's got a whole communication infrastructure. And then there's the anti-vampire clause, which is genuinely entertaining. Dibella explicitly discourages relations with the undead in any form. Vampires, Draugr, any of it. Her teachings are entirely life-affirming, and anything that's technically dead is completely off the table. So if you were wondering whether the goddess of unlimited love draws the line anywhere, yes, she draws it at corpses, which is, a fair boundary to establish. But if Dibella represents the beauty and passion of mortal experience, the next divine on our list couldn't be more different. He doesn't care about your feeling. He cares about logic. Julianos. Julianos is the god of wisdom, logic, and magic. And honestly, he might be the most underappreciated divine in the entire pantheon. His domain covers literature, law, history, and here's the interesting part: the resolution of contradictions through reason. That's his actual job. When two things in the universe don't make sense together, Julianos is the divine principle that sorts it out. Which is, not ideal when you realize how many contradictions exist in Tamriel. But here's where it gets really interesting. Julianos doesn't treat magic the way most people think about it. Sorcery, alchemy, enchantment, all of these fall under his domain, but not as mystical arts. He treats them as branches of rigorous intellectual discipline. Magic, in the eyes of Julianos, is basically applied mathematics. You don't pray your way into a fireball. You study your way into one. His temples function as educational institutions rather than spiritual retreats, and they're historically responsible for spreading the formal term magicka throughout Tamriel. Before his priesthood standardized the language, people were just calling it whatever they wanted. Julianos literally gave the world a vocabulary for magic. His Nordic roots trace back to Junal, the father of language and mathematics. But here's the thing. Junal fell out of favor among the Nords over time. A culture that prizes axes and mead over textbooks and equations gradually stopped caring about the god of homework. So Julianos became more of a Cyrodiilic institution, which is a shame, because his influence runs deeper than most people realize. Tiber Septim himself founded monastic orders specifically dedicated to Julianos. Their purpose? To serve as keepers of the Elder Scrolls themselves, the single most powerful prophetic artifacts in all of existence. The scrolls that literally blind you if you read them wrong, and Julianos is their divine guardian. That's not a minor portfolio. That's custody of fate itself. His followers live by a simple creed: know the truth, observe the law, and when you don't know something, seek wisdom from the wise. Straightforward, almost suspiciously reasonable for a fantasy religion. Now, nobody talks about this, but the contrast between Julianos and Hermaeus Mora is fascinating. Both claim dominion over knowledge, but Julianos represents accessible, organized, shareable knowledge, libraries, schools, public education. Hermaeus Mora hoards forbidden secrets in a nightmare dimension made of tentacles and screaming books. One builds universities, the other builds traps. Julianos is the Wikipedia of the divines. Hermaeus Mora is the dark web, and here's the detail that ties everything together. Julianos is explicitly named after Julian Leifve, one of the original designers of the Elder Scrolls series. His role as the keeper of knowledge and the resolver of contradictions intentionally mirrors what a game designer actually does, maintaining the structural integrity of an entire fictional universe. Every time the lore contradicts itself, every time a timeline doesn't add up, that's a Julianos problem. The developers literally built themselves into the pantheon as the god responsible for making sure everything makes sense. That is genuinely brilliant world-building self-awareness, and the fact that almost nobody talks about it is criminal. Despite all of this cosmic importance, Julianos barely gets a mention in Skyrim. You can find his shrine in the Temple of the Divines in Solitude, and that's about it. No quests, no major storylines. The god responsible for guarding the Elder Scrolls in a game called The Elder Scrolls, and he's basically furniture. I don't know what to tell you. But if Julianos represents the invisible intellectual architecture holding everything together, the next divine represents something you can actually feel on your skin every single second you spend in Skyrim: Kynareth. Kynareth is the goddess of the heavens, winds, elements, and unseen spirits of the air. She is, by all accounts, the strongest of the sky spirits, patron deity of sailors and travelers, the divine responsible for every breath you take and every gust of wind that fills a sail or freezes your face off on the throat of the world. But here's what makes Kynareth genuinely fascinating. She may have been the first deity to agree to the plan for creating the mortal plane. Not Akatosh, not Mara, Kynareth. She looked at the blueprint for Mundus and said, yeah, let's do it, then provided the fundamental space and atmospheric conditions necessary for existence to even happen. Without her, there's no sky, there's no air, there's no space for anything to exist in. Every other divine could have shown up with their contributions and it wouldn't have mattered, because there'd be nowhere to put any of it. And yet, most players walk right past her shrine without a second thought. The naming situation with Kynareth tells you everything about the theological tension running through Skyrim. The Imperials call her Kynareth. Clean, formal, sounds like something you'd read in a government pamphlet. But the traditional Nords, they call her Kyne. The Khajiit know her as Kynarthi. The Redguards call her Tava. Same goddess, completely different relationships. And the Kyne version is the one that matters most in Skyrim, because that's where her worship gets personal. Traditional Nordic hunters don't just acknowledge her. They invoke her as the Mother of Men, the Mother of Nords. She's not some distant cosmic force to them. She's family. Now here's where it gets genuinely poetic, and honestly, a little haunting. The Nords believe that Kyne is the one who leads fallen souls to Sovngarde. This earned her the title Kiss at the End. Think about that for a second. The same goddess whose breath fills your lungs the moment you're born is the last thing you feel when you die. She sustains your life for every single second you're alive. And then, when it's over, she gently guides you to the Nordic afterlife. She is literally the first and last divine force you ever experience, which is, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Her presence in Skyrim reflects this dual nature in a quietly understated way. If you climb the 7,000 steps to High Hrothgar, you'll find shrines to Kyne along the path. Simple stone altars with etched plaques and lit braziers standing against the open sky. No grand statues. No elaborate iconography, just stone, fire, and wind. There's something fitting about that. The goddess of the air doesn't need a cathedral. She is the cathedral. Every frozen gust that nearly knocks you off the mountainside on your way up is her reminding you she's there. It's a surprisingly elegant piece of design for a game that also lets you put a bucket on a shopkeeper's head and rob them blind. Kinnereth also maintains a complementary relationship with Zenithar that most people overlook entirely. She provides the raw materials of creation, the wind, the rain, the natural resources that exist, because she made the sky and the elements possible. Zenithar then takes those raw materials and facilitates their transformation into crafted goods through human labor. She gives, he builds. It's a divine supply chain, and without Kinnereth's end of it, Zenithar's entire domain collapses. No raw materials, no commerce, no sky, no civilization. She's the foundation that everyone else builds on top of and nobody thinks to thank. The widow of Shor, the breath in your chest, the kiss when it stops. Kinnereth is quietly one of the most important divines in the entire pantheon, and the fact that she doesn't get more attention is honestly criminal. But if Kinnereth is the divine who sustains life and guides you gently into death, the next goddess takes a completely different approach to what makes existence worth living in the first place. Mara. If you've ever played Skyrim for more than a few hours, you've interacted with Mara's domain whether you realized it or not. That amulet of Mara sitting in your inventory? The one you bought from Marimal and the Bee and Barb because you wanted to marry Lydia or whoever caught your eye? That's not just a game mechanic. That's a literal divine prerequisite. Without Mara's blessing, no marriage in Skyrim is considered legitimate. You can be the Dragonborn, Thane of every hold, Slayer of Alduin himself, and you still can't put a ring on it without buying a necklace from a priest first. Mara is the goddess of love, fertility, compassion, and agriculture. She's known as Mother Mara, or Mother Mile, and her commandment instructs the faithful to live soberly and peacefully, honor their parents, and preserve the peace and security of the home and family. On paper, that sounds like the most boring divine in the entire pantheon. In practice, she's the one holding civilization together with both hands. Here's the thing about Mara that most people overlook. Her priesthood doesn't care who you want to marry. Man, woman, Argonian, orc, dark elf, doesn't matter. Mara's temples will perform the ceremony regardless of gender or race, because her teaching is explicit. Those distinctions mean nothing to the divine principle of love. For a fantasy medieval setting, that's a quietly radical theological stance. Most religions in these worlds are busy condemning people for looking at the wrong deity sideways, and Mara's priests are just out here like, you two love each other? Cool, Wednesday works for us. But Mara isn't just the wedding planner of the divines. Her mythological significance runs far deeper than most players realize. In the earliest moments of creation, the original spirits, known as the Errata, sacrificed parts of themselves to form the mortal plane. Mara was among those who gave of herself during this process, pouring her essence into the very fabric of Nirn. That means the world you're walking around in, every blade of grass in the rift, every hearth fire keeping a family warm, exists in part because Mara bled for it. Every time you stop to appreciate something peaceful in Tamriel, you're standing on a piece of her sacrifice. And remember Arkay? The god of life and death we talked about earlier? Turns out Mara is directly responsible for his existence as a divine. According to one of the most widely accepted origin stories, Arkay was originally a mortal man, a shopkeeper obsessed with deciphering an ancient text about the secrets of life and death. He spent so long studying it that he neglected everything else, and by the time he finally understood what the manuscript was telling him, he was already dying of plague. At the threshold of death, it was Mara who appeared and offered him the choice: die now as a mortal or become a god for eternity, charged with keeping the balance between life and death in the universe. Arkay chose divinity. So the god who governs every funeral rite and protects every corpse from necromantic violation only exists because Mara decided he was worthy. That's not a minor footnote. That's one divine literally creating another. Scholars have also drawn parallels between Mara and Mary from Christian tradition, noting the shared emphasis on maternal love, compassion, and the feminine divine principle. The name's similarity alone is hard to ignore, and the theological overlap. A mother figure who embodies unconditional love and serves as the emotional anchor of an entire belief system feels too precise to be coincidental. What makes Mara genuinely compelling is that she represents something most divine pantheons treat as an afterthought: love, family, the quiet act of raising children and keeping a home safe. These aren't dramatic. They don't make for epic battles or or world-ending prophecies. But without them, nothing else in Tamriel functions. No armies march without families to protect. No cities thrive without communities bound together by something stronger than commerce or law. Mara understood that before anyone else did. But if Mara represents the gentle bonds that hold society together, the next divine represents what happens when those bonds need enforcing. Stendarr. Stendarr's very title tells you everything you need to know about why he's one of the most philosophically loaded divines in the entire pantheon. He's the god of righteous might and merciful forbearance. Read that again. Righteous might, merciful forbearance. Those two concepts are in a constant tug of war with each other, and his entire theology is built around the tension between them. Here's the thing. Most gods of strength in fantasy settings are pretty straightforward. They hit things. They encourage you to hit things. Maybe they reward you for hitting things especially hard. Stendarr isn't that. Stendarr is the god who says, yes, you absolutely have the power to crush your enemy. But the real question is whether you should. His domain represents the principle that true strength expresses itself through restraint and fairness, rather than unbridled domination. He's not anti-violence. He's anti-pointless violence. There's a difference, and that difference is basically his entire religion. In practice, this makes him the patron of magistrates, rulers, and every citizen across Tamriel who believes in fair governance. He's the divine backbone of the justice system. Every judge who passes a fair sentence, every soldier who protects civilians instead of looting them, every ruler who chooses diplomacy before drawing a sword, they're all operating within Stendarr's sphere, whether they know it or not. He's the god of doing the right thing when doing the wrong thing would be way easier and probably more fun. But here's where it gets fascinating. Stendarr doesn't just passively embody justice. He's specifically regarded as the god of compassion and righteous rule over mortals. In a pantheon full of gods who sacrificed themselves to create the world and arguably got a raw deal out of it, Stendarr is the one whose sphere explicitly includes mercy toward the people living in it. He positioned himself as the intersection between divine authority and mortal welfare, essentially the god who insists that power comes with obligation. This philosophy gets even more interesting when you consider his connection to governance across Tamriel. Stendarr's teachings form the moral bedrock of imperial law and order. Whether the Empire always lived up to those ideals is another question entirely, but the framework was there. His principles were baked into the institutions that held Tamriel together for centuries. A god of justice and mercy underpinning the legal philosophy of an entire continent is either the strongest endorsement of structured governance in Elder Scrolls history, or the most ambitious moral experiment ever attempted, possibly both. Now, gameplay-wise, his blessing grants block more effectively against incoming attacks. On the surface, that sounds like a nice little perk, but theologically, it makes perfect sense. Stendarr's entire philosophy is about measured defense, not reckless offense. His blessing doesn't make you hit harder. It makes you better at absorbing what the world throws at you. Protection, not aggression. Even his gameplay mechanic reinforces his philosophy, and that distinction matters more than most players realize. Any warlord can swing a mace. Any tyrant can crush opposition through brute force. Stendarr asks a harder question. Is the force you're deploying just? Are you fighting to protect, or are you fighting to conquer? Are you a shield or a battering ram? His theology doesn't reject violence. It demands that violence answer to something higher than personal glory or territorial ambition. The vigilance of Stendarr, his most devoted followers in Skyrim, embody this philosophy by actively hunting Daedra worshippers and undead threats across the province. They're not pacifists. They're warriors with a moral framework. They'll absolutely destroy a vampire, but they'll do it because vampires represent a violation of natural law, not because they enjoy it, at least in theory. But if Stendarr represents the moral backbone of how civilizations should govern and fight, the next divine represents something equally foundational but far less dramatic: how civilizations actually pay for everything. Zenithar. In a pantheon full of cosmic dragons, death gods, and sky mothers, Zenithar is the divine who looked at a blacksmith hammering at an anvil and said, "That's sacred." And honestly, he might be the most quietly profound god in the entire Elder Scrolls universe. Zenithar is the god of trade, commerce, work, and craftsmanship. His whole theological framework boils down to one deceptively simple idea. The spiritual benefit of labor isn't the money you make. It's the honest engagement with productive activity itself. The work is the point, not the paycheck, which, coming from a god whose followers are literally merchants, is a surprisingly philosophical stance. His followers are taught to work hard, spend wisely, never steal, and never scam. That's it. That's the moral code. No cosmic riddles, no apocalyptic prophecies. Just be honest, make things, and don't rip people off. Traders across Tamriel carry amulets of Zenithar for luck in their financial dealings, and his primary symbol is the anvil. not a sword, not a scroll, the tool you use to make other tools. Here's where it gets interesting. His chapels and shrines don't just function as places of worship. They actively serve as gathering points for merchants and tradespeople, places where commerce and faith are literally the same activity. His priests aren't just leading prayers, they're blessing transactions, sanctifying labor, making sure the divine stamp of approval sits on honest work, which is, not exactly the glamorous side of godhood, but arguably more useful than half the cosmic nonsense the other divines get up to. Now, his creation story is where things get genuinely beautiful. Zenithar participated in the craft of creating Mundus alongside the other divine artisans. Then, like all the Aedra, he was bound to the Earth's bones. His origin story literally frames the creation of reality as a craft project. The universe wasn't willed into existence by pure cosmic power. It was built, assembled, worked on. Zenithar's entire existence argues that creation and craftsmanship are the same thing, and he doesn't work alone. Zenithar maintains a relationship with Kynareth that's one of the most elegant pieces of theology in the whole franchise. Kynareth provides the raw materials of creation, the wind, the sky, the natural world. Zenithar facilitates their transformation through human labor and commerce. She grows the trees, he builds the houses. It's a divine supply chain, and it frames the relationship between nature and civilization as collaboration rather than conflict. His association with the Bosmeri god Xin suggests deep continuities between imperial and elven religious traditions, meaning the concept of sacred labor predates the empire itself. Elves were venerating honest work long before Tiber Septim showed up and started renaming everybody's gods. But here's the detail that stuck with me the most. Some fan theorists have drawn uncomfortable parallels between Zenithar and Clavicus Vile. Both gods deal in transaction and exchange. Both operate in the space where two parties agree to a deal. The difference is everything. Zenithar demands honesty, fair prices, mutual benefit. Clavicus Vile exploits the fine print, twists the wording, and makes sure you lose everything while technically getting what you asked for. Same mechanism, opposite morality. One represents commerce as shared prosperity, the other represents commerce as a weapon, and that's what makes Zenithar quietly the most important divine in the pantheon. Akatosh governs time, Arkay governs death, Kynareth governs the sky, but Zenithar governs the thing most people actually spend their lives doing: working, building, trading. He's the god who says a carpenter sanding a table is performing an act just as sacred as a priest praying at an altar. That meaning isn't found in some grand cosmic revelation. It's found in honest work, done well for fair compensation. In a world full of Daedric princes offering power through corruption and Aedric gods demanding devotion through suffering, Zenithar just asks you to do your job and not be a jerk about it. And somehow, that's the most radical theology in all of Tamriel. If you enjoyed this video and want to see every legendary armor in Elder Scrolls 5 explained, click the video on the screen now.